So this first little paragraph here kind of sets out the reason why we want you to know how to keep a laboratory notebook well. So it says the laboratory notebook is perhaps the single most important piece of laboratory equipment. A scientist's notebook may be directly entered as evidence in court, and as such may be worth millions to a company in patent litigation. While you may never be in a situation where your notebook is worth $1 million, good record keeping is essential in all scientific research. In an academic laboratory, the consequences of poor record keeping are wasted time as you repeat the experiment, or simply failing the exercise. In an industrial laboratory, inadequate lab records ultimately cost the company money, either in the cost of time and materials or as the result of legal action. So, learning how to keep good, clear, appropriate records of anything that you do in the lab is an important skill. So, your laboratory notebook should be a permanent and dated record of all your laboratory data. It should be written in ink. It should not have any pages torn out, so the numbers of the pages should be sequential and should show your progress in the lab. While it should be legible, it does not need to be perfect. It should reflect a work in progress. So here's the setup. This is what we want you to have for your lab notebook. So you're going to use a notebook with carbonless copy pages, which is what you have. Your pages are already consecutively numbered in the upper right-hand corner. Your lab notebook should be written in blue or black ink. It should be a permanent record of all your data and observations. And like we just checked, if your ink bleeds, it's a bad idea to use that in your notebook. So, like you just did, you want to make sure any pen that you use, that you test it. So you write on a piece of paper, run some water over it, see whether it smears. So if you switch pens for any reason, you want to test it again. Usually within a brand, if you have the same type of pen, it's going to be the same. But if you switch types of pens, they can be different. In general, most people need to skip a line in between lines of writing. Some people's handwriting is so neat and precise that that's not really necessary, but most people need to do that just so that it makes it easier to read. The exception might be when you're making a table or a graph, and then you don't have to worry about that so much. If you have any large empty pages, so like if you finish up your conclusion and it's only like a quarter of the way down the page, you're not going to start your next lab on that same page. You're going to go to the next page to start the next lab. So that empty space, you should put an X and write your initials on it to say, yes, I meant to leave this blank. Okay? That's just kind of speaks to your integrity as a scientist. You never white out or scribble out information. If you make a mistake, then you're going to use a single line through the whatever the information is. So if you say you recorded 4.125 grams, and then your lab partner says, no, it's 4.425. You just want to put a little line through this one so you can still see the first one, okay? And that's understood that you made an error. You don't want to do this, totally obliterate that first one. Again, that speaks to your integrity as a scientist. Now, you may think that we're making too big of a deal about this, but people's careers have been ruined because they have falsified data, okay? And there are still people who believe that vaccines cause autism because a scientist faked his data. And so we have had measles outbreaks in schools, measles which pretty much had been eradicated because of someone's research, because they lied. And their scientific reputation is completely ruined, okay? So it's really important that you start now, that you think about this as being a document that you are going to be truthful about. So we're not going to write down what should have happened. We're going to write down what actually happened, what we measured, what we saw. We will deal with our observations in our conclusions and our calculations. But you need to be honest, okay? When you write your lab data, when you write your observations, you want to record accurately, okay? Now, of course, at this level, there's not going to be the lab notebook police to come and pick you up for a violation, but it's a good habit to get into. I know you don't always think of it that way, but you are building habits for your future. And since this is maybe your first exposure to a formal laboratory notebook, let's start off on the right foot, okay? So we are going to attach any kind of tables and charts. We're going to use tape, glue, staples, something like that. And we're going to glue them to the page that you're going to keep in your lab notebook, okay? So we'll talk about that later. Usually most of the graphs and stuff, I've already seen them, so when you turn in your copy to be graded, I don't need to see them again. They really need to be in your laboratory notebook, because sometimes colleges want to see your laboratory notebook in order to grant you credit for lab, all right? So on the front page, if you find the front page, make sure you have, AP, Cap, Chem, your name, your class period, and probably my name too, because if it gets misplaced somewhere, they're probably going to put it in my mailbox, okay? And so you'll notice too that there's a table of contents that's built into most of the laboratory notebooks. So you're going to keep a table of contents. The date is always going to be the first day you step in the lab. So if you don't know what the first day is going to be, you're just going to leave the date blank until you actually go in there. And I really don't expect you to put an entry for every day. For every lab, a new entry, and the page that it starts on is okay. Okay? All right, so we're going to do our first lab entry. Each lab is going to start on a new page, so new front page. If you look at your lab notebook, and I think I've pointed this out to you before, there's a little flap. And if you look carefully, there are actually two page number ones. They're stuck together. One of them is blue, has boxes in blue, and one of them has boxes in yellow. Okay? So there's this one, and then the next one has everything in yellow. It's the same page. See, like that. Okay. This year, I think what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you keep the original, and I'm going to collect the copy. So I want you to try as best you can to make sure that copy comes through. To write on this, what you want to do is you want to take both page number ones and put this flap in between that and page number 2. Okay? So the carbonless copy will transfer onto your second page, okay? And then all your data graphs and tables and things like that we might print off are going to go on your page, on the blue page. And you're going to turn in the yellow page to me, okay? All right, so these first 6 items we're going to talk about, and you don't have to do anything yet. These first 6 items is what we consider to be our pre-lab. So when I give you a lab and I say, okay, complete the pre-lab, these are the 6 things I want you to do. And you should write what's in bold. You should write that in your lab notebook and then do what it says, okay? So the first thing is the title, and there is actually a space in your laboratory notebook for the title. You should put the date and your name. We're not going to be using lab partners right now, so you don't have to worry about writing in your lab partner. The second important part, you're going to write purpose. And what you want to do is you want to either make a statement or write a question that describes what you're doing in lab and how you're going to do it. So what are we trying to do? Clearly and concisely, 2 or 3 complete sentences describe the goal of the experiment, including the general method that will be used in expected results. Use your third-person passive voice, okay? So in scientific writing, there's a few differences between regular writing. One of them is that it's not about you. If you use we or I in any of your writing, then you are saying that you are a crucial part to this experiment, and this experiment could not possibly happen without you. And that's not true. Okay, the experiment is the star of the show. So you always want to write about the experiment, okay, what was done. Usually when we talk about what we did in the lab, we use past tense. If we're talking about something that's theoretical, that's not really past tense because it is, right? Theories are, they exist. And so I'm not going to be real picky about this, but that's sort of a distinction that you'll see. So you want to always think how you can write something without using I or we or you, okay? So the subject should always be the experiment. And I think they're here for National Honor Society. The third thing you're going to do is you're going to cite the reference. So unless the work that you're doing is originally yours, it was your idea, your plan, you should cite something, because this is somebody else's idea. So a lot of the labs that we do come from Flynn Scientific, and so that's fine, just citing Flynn Scientific. You really should include the name of the lab there, but if you use the same name for your lab as what they have, that's kind of redundant. So technically, we would want you to write the publisher or the author, and then the name of the experiment if it's different from your title. Fourthly, we're going to do safety. And again, you're going to write safety, and then you're going to write this part. So what safety precautions are specific to this lab? So we're assuming that everyone is wearing closed-toe shoes, everyone's wearing goggles, everyone's got an apron, everybody's got long hair pulled back, and no one is eating or drinking in the lab. That's just baseline. But are there specific things, specific to the lab and the chemicals that you're using, that you need to be aware of? Like if things are flammable, or if they're poisonous, or if they give off strong odors, or anything like that. And usually in the document it will say caution, and it will give you the caution. So I want you to you can do a bulleted list of things to look out for. That's absolutely appropriate. And then 5 is equipment and chemicals. So you want to write down the equipment that you need to use, so what you need to get out or obtain to do the lab, and then also what reagents, what chemicals are you going to use, and what are their concentrations. You don't have to say amounts, but like 0.5 molar sodium chloride solution. That would be one of your chemicals, okay? And again, you can do these as a bulleted list. You can do 2 bulleted lists, in each, one in each column, one for equipment, one for chemicals. You can do a table, Just some organized way of showing that you know what equipment and what chemicals you need. And then there are usually pre-lab questions. And I'm not going to make you write the question out, but you should always avoid using the word it. It is something. It has a name. It is a thing. So don't say it. All right? So is it the solution, the chromatography paper? What is it that you're talking about instead of saying it? Please clearly label the questions. Show any calculations. I need to see, something, even if it's something that you just put in the calculator, like density. I need to at least see the mass and the volume, mass over volume equals. I need to see some kind of calculation. And make sure you have number, unit, substance. It also helps a lot when I'm grading it if you circle your answers, right? That just helps me to locate things. So we're going to stop here with our discussion because this is our pre-lab, and this is what you do before you go to the lab. Let me talk about one other thing, actually. Let me slide down here. So when you go into the lab, you're going to use a 2-column method of recording your data. So your page is already divided into 2 columns. The left is going to be a brief description of what you actually did. Okay? Obtain the mass of sodium chloride. That's what you did. On the right-hand side, that's where you want to put your numbers or your observation. It can be a bulleted list. We don't need to have a narrative for this. You are going to record your data as you take it. So don't write it on a piece of scrap paper and then transfer it over to your lab notebook. That's a no-no. Okay, you write it directly into your lab notebook. I know you like things to be neat and tidy, but this is not the time for that. Okay, you will have a chance to make a beautiful data table and present your data in a very organized way later on in the lab, okay? This is where you just write it down, okay? So both observational data and measurements. So really there's 2 kinds of data. There's measurement data, which we really call data, and then there are derived numbers, things that you calculate. So when we talk about taking data in the lab, we are talking about observations and measurements that you are doing in the laboratory. All right? Let's see. Always label data, include units. If you don't have any units with your data, it's not data. It has to have a unit, okay? Use sig figs. So if you're using the analytical balances, they have, I think, 8 or 9 sig figs. You need to write all of them down, all right? If in doubt, if you think, should I write this down? The answer is yes, okay? Just always write it down. It's better to have too much data than to not have enough. You can't go back and have that moment again. So even if it's data that you don't use, write it down, okay? Yeah, and this is where you're going to say, oh, no, I don't want to write that down. And you're going to want to scribble it out. Don't resist that urge, all right? So this suggestion, these gentlemen wrote I don't even know if they're all guys. I don't know. These people wrote a paper about the laboratory notebook, and they say, when observations are recorded in the lab notebook, they are always written in the passive tense. So instead of, I saw the solution turn green, you write, the solution turned green. In general, personal pronouns are not used in scientific writing. And other scientists will judge you. They say here, the overuse of personal pronouns is taken as a sign of arrogance, and the passive is thought to sound more objective. So scientists do get judgy. All right, and so here are some more suggestions about recording data. This first lab is not going to be perfect. You are not going to do everything right. That's okay. We should see some growth between now, your first lab, and May. Your lab reports in May should look a lot better, be more sophisticated, include more information. Okay, it's just going to be a lot easier the more you do. All right, even the technique in this lab it's not going to be perfect. Okay, so don't go in with that expectation. Do your best, get the best data that you can, and then we're going to use it. Okay, so record all data and observations directly in your laboratory notebook. You're going to need to read your lab and plan what you're going to do because you have a certain amount of time. And if you're going to calculus, Mr. Gimrick gets really upset if you're late to his class. So you don't want to upset Mr. Gimrick. Don't use scraps of paper or weird, just random things to write your data on. It goes in your lab book, okay? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth bullet point, it does not have to be perfectly neat. It has to be a record of what happened in the lab. You'll have a chance to clarify when you write the lab report. Do not worry about calculations while you're in the lab. Record data only. And then you can see 8 is after you finish the lab and cleaned up, then we're going to organize the data that you've taken in a beautiful, neat, easy to read data table. Okay? So that's when you get to make everything look pretty. Right? For those of you who really want to make everything look pretty. Okay? I'm not one of those people. Mrs. Simpkins, I have so much respect for her because she makes everything look pretty. All of my stuff that I write looks very utilitarian. Her stuff looks pretty. And that's okay. All right? So take a look at the lab. If you look under that lab module, and you do need to read it. I would open it in Notability and highlight stuff. That would be my